But the other thing that happened is I couldn't sit still. It was like this big adrenaline burst. I mean, the way you would feel if you wake up, like you're dead asleep and you wake up and you're standing on an airplane and the door's open and somebody's about to push you out. It was that intense. And it was like a nightmare. It was just this feeling that I had that it was just, there was no control.
Was it super uncomfortable?
It was incredibly uncomfortable. And I got up, I was literally running around my house and I couldn't slow down. I couldn't calm down. I couldn't sit still. It was like I wanted to peel my skin off or something. Like I wanted to jump out of my skin. And there was nothing that I could do, no matter what, to calm that down. And I know that sounds like a panic attack. It wasn't. It was not your garden variety panic attack. It was like nothing I had ever felt before.
Honestly, because I had a similar. So my first symptom was like the crazy insomnia. And then I woke up in the middle of the night one night with that just insane sensation. It almost was like in my chest. But I didn't feel like my heart was pumping fast. It felt like the fear you might feel like, and I've always said, like if when you're just about to get into a car accident and you really think you're just about to when you're cut off or you're just about to get into a car accident and you get that very momentary just like dropping feeling,
but continuous
all day, every day.
Hello?
I know we talked briefly a few weeks ago. I don't remember the details of that. I intentionally didn't go and reread it on purpose because I wanted it to be sort of the conversation to be sort of fresh. So what I do remember is are you a counselor?
Yes.
Okay, so how long have you been doing that?
So I got my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling in 2019. So I went straight through from, undergrad to grad school. And so I've been a therapist, counselor, whatever you want to call, somebody with my degree since then. Yeah.
Gotcha. So the reason you and I got connected was the Reglan support Facebook group. And you were given Reglan specifically, correct? Because I know there's some other folks in the group who have had other antipsychotics with similar effects.
Yes, because the thing about Reglan, which I really wish was explained to me better, was, it's not used as an antipsychotic today. Because I think from what I remember reading is that they found that it's not the most potent antipsychotic. So they used it as an antipsychotic decades ago, and then they said, hey, like these same properties are helpful for other issues like nausea, vomiting, as well as another side effect is milk production. I think they realized that males were like producing milk. Yeah,
What?
they realized men were producing milk, and that's when they realized that's a side effect of Reglan. So that's why they start. Isn't that? I know that's how they realized that. The same thing. Interesting. The same thing. Anyway, that's how they realized. That it helps with milk production. It's a side effect, prolactinemia. Yeah.
Okay. So does it cause gynecomastia or just milk production?
What's gyno? Is that like male milk production?
No, it's like man boobs.
Causing. That's a great question. So I think the idea is that it increases prolactin in the brain, which is the hormone that promotes like milk production. It's one of those hormones that they're all connected. Yeah. So they found out.
I sort of assumed that was still that same mechanism as like the prokinetic. Like if you're already producing milk, you would produce more milk. That's interesting that it produced milk in men. I had no clue.
Yeah. That's what I remember hearing that or reading that somewhere, that they just learned that was a side effect. So then they started prescribing that to women. I don't think it's like a super popular avenue. Because I don't think that they prescribe it just to anyone. Like it's not something routinely they'll do. But I went in specifically to my doctor. Well, it was at my 6-week postpartum visit. So every time somebody has a baby, you go in at 6 weeks and they make sure everything looks fine and you're healing right. And I just happened to note that, like, hey, this isn't working out. What are your thoughts? And they did blood work to see if I'm anemic, because that can cause low milk production. And they ran my prolactin levels. And they noticed that my prolactin was low, or lower than they would expect for somebody that's been exclusively or trying to feed their baby. 8 times a day I was pumping and trying to feed her. So they said, well, my prolactin is low for the number of times that I'm breastfeeding her and pumping, and they prescribed Reglan.
So that was the reason why you had it. Okay. I didn't remember if you had a GI issue or. So how many weeks were you postpartum, you said, when you started?
Well, actually, I think I might have made a doctor's visit before my 6 weeks visit, because I started having all of my symptoms right at about 6 weeks postpartum.
So how much were you taking? And you were taking the pills, correct?
I was taking the pills. I think the dosage was, now I wish I did a little bit more research, thought about things a little bit more.
It's okay.
But I believe I was taking the 10 milligrams 3 times a day.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a bit.
What do they prescribe for GI issues?
What I've seen commonly prescribed, the lowest dose, and it seems like this is common, I'm not sure, is 5 milligrams 3 times a day. In my case, I only took 5 milligrams before bed, and only occasionally. I didn't take it every day. Yeah, but I took it for like 9 months.
Oh.
Yeah. So how long were you on it?
I was on it for 1 week total.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. It could have been 5 milligrams 3 times a day. I would have to look.
It's still quite a bit. If you're taking it 3 times a day.
Yeah, and I was taking it within a 12-hour period. So when I woke up, midday, and night. So I think it was kind of a compressed time. So when did you first notice things were off? Talk to me about the process of the onset of your issues. I honestly noticed that I felt different within probably 2 days. And
wow.
At first, it felt fine. At first it was really weird, because I felt like I had a little bit more energy, which, the first 6 weeks my sleep schedule was totally a wreck. I had a newborn, and I was off. I hadn't been, sleeping for 6 weeks all that great. My baby was premature, so feedings were just longer and more draining, just because we were taking care of her, around the clock. And so once I started taking the medication, I started having more energy, and I remember asking my husband, am I okay? I feel better. So it gave me more energy. I was like, this is kind of weird. It was kind of honestly a red flag for me. Because I'm all of a sudden feeling different. I don't care how different, whether it's good, bad, or the other, anything that's affecting my mood, like I was just kind of a little bit more on high alert. So the first couple days, I just started feeling better, having more energy. And then by the fifth day, I was having some trouble sleeping. And then almost like at day 7, it's just like I completely stopped being able to sleep. Now, my energy my energy started, it was like leveled out. So like I didn't have any increased energy. My mood was, pretty stable. So I was paying attention to all of those things because the fear I had, and I did a little bit of research on Reglan before I took it. And the fear was it can induce bipolar. It can induce mania. Yeah. So that's one of like the side effects is it can induce a mania. So I was kind of on high alert with that. I think I walked into taking the medication with just a little fear just because of my background. And I was like, is this the start of a mania? But I didn't have any other symptoms of a manic episode. I just stopped being able to sleep, and it was torturous. It was completely torturous. I know that you had said that you had trouble sleeping. I don't know if that was like one of the main symptoms that you had, or
that doesn't even begin to cover it.
I mean, it for me, that was the first like very serious symptom that I noticed that was totally different than any of my other like how I would be in my everyday life outside of the medication. That was just like the first symptom that really, really was insidious.
Okay, so I have never talked about this publicly. There's some people that I'm close to that I've shared some of this stuff with, and there's some people I work with, but it's not something I've ever made like a public statement or public conversation about. Partly because my job is real estate agent, and it's sort of my role to absorb other people's stress and sort of counsel them through a difficult process, a stressful process in their life. And I don't ever want my clients to feel at all like I'm bleeding on them in any way, or that they can't rely on me in any way. So I say all this to say this was the worst experience of my life. I've lost many relatives. I've lost friends. I've dealt with alcoholism, people that I'm very close to that I've lived with, severe alcoholism, other addictions, other trauma. By far, being given this drug was the worst thing that I've ever been through. But that said, last year was still my best year professionally, and I don't think I ever let any of my clients feel like I was dropping the ball. I just sort of did whatever I had to do to take care of them. So with that said, I started it because I've had acid reflux for like 10 years. 13 years. I'm older than I think. It started in 2011, and that was well controlled for me for a decade with ranitidine or Zantac. As you probably know, probably 3-ish years ago, just before COVID, there was actually a podcaster, I believe Peter Attia, who's also a doctor, ran some tests on ranitidine and found that it was high in a particular carcinogenic chemical. And he thought that it was one specific maker of the product, or it was an issue with production. And over time, and I could have this story wrong, I'm doing the best I can. So over time, they figured out that just this molecule, it's in the inherent manufacturing process of it, no matter who makes it, it's unstable such that some of it degrades into this carcinogen. So, and they've been giving this to everyone for a long time. They give it to babies. I took it for 10 years. And so suddenly it's pulled from all the shelves in every pharmacy in America. And you still can't get it. It's never coming back. So at the same time, my symptoms with the reflux has sort of been continuing, like very slowly getting worse over a decade. So I started taking PPI drugs. So are you familiar with PPIs?
Mm-mm.
So if you have acid reflux or heartburn and you go mostly what will be prescribed or what you'll get over the counter is drugs like omeprazole, esomeprazole, pantoprazole. Those are drugs like Prilosec, Protonix, right? All dexlansoprazole. All those drugs are the same drug class, and actually they're just making very slight modifications to that molecule every few years so they can reintroduce new intellectual property on it. They're all kind of the same drug, honestly. And so one will be out for a while, and then it'll go to generic, and then it'll go over the counter, and then it'll come out with a new one. So I have taken those over the years, but what happens when you take these drugs, and nobody sue me for saying this, but when you take these drugs, so you have proton pumps in your stomach that secrete hydrochloric acid, right? And your body wants the pH of your stomach to be a certain amount of acidity from this hydrochloric acid in order to digest food, mainly protein. So what happens when you take these drugs, your stomach sort of adapts to it, just like your brain adapts to like a benzodiazepine, right? So the way your stomach adapts is it creates more proton pumps. So for most people, I think that the adaptation is less than the benefit. So they have a new baseline, but it's a higher baseline when they're on it. For me, it seems like no matter what I'm on, I get back to the baseline I was on before I started it, like pretty much within a couple weeks. And it's funny, the FDA only ever approved it for 2 weeks of use, but people are on these for decades, right? So anyway, what happens to me is I start it and I think, okay, I'm in sort of a crisis here where I've got esophagitis, I've got some bad gastritis. I'm going to take this.
Like at some point it becomes risk, you know, weighing the risks and the benefits and.
So my strategy is always take a bit of it for a couple weeks so I can sort of heal a little bit and some of the inflammation goes down, and then try to wean off of it. But I found myself in the last few years, like I never seem to get off of it. The dose continues to escalate, partly because ranitidine was the tool that I would use to sort of offset when I would wean off of it, and it's no longer available to me. So I went to see my GI doctor in Eastern Kentucky. I live in Lexington, which is Central Kentucky, but I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I'm a hillbilly by birth.
I was wondering what the accent was going to be like, because I'm from Virginia, but I don't feel like I don't have an accent.
Yeah, my accent actually used to be a lot thicker. I haven't intentionally gotten rid of it. It's just sort of happened to me. But like when I go back home, you drive down US 23 and you flip a switch, and it's like I go back to 8 years old.
Great.
But anyway, so it's actually nice to kind of sometimes go see my hometown doctors because it's less bureaucratic. You have real relationships with the people. It's like, if you need your records, you can just call and say, hey, can you send me my records? And they say, sure, sign this. And then they give you your records. It's amazing. It's how medicine should be. So he was easier to get an appointment with. So I went to see him and said, my reflux is getting worse and these drugs are not working. What can we do? And so he said, well, if your reflux is getting worse, the drugs are not working, other than surgery, I think you might have gastroparesis.
Oh, okay.
So gastroparesis is where your stomach doesn't empty quickly enough, and I assume it's an issue with the vagus nerve, which innervates your stomach, but I'm not sure. So I said, well, I had a gastric emptying test 10 years ago, and he said, yeah, but I don't even consider that test valid. But rather than do a new test, why don't we just try this medication? And if the medication helps, then you probably have gastroparesis, but good news, the medication's working. So, and I was like, okay, so what does it do? He says, so it's a prokinetic, so it stimulates muscle contractions in your digestive system. It just sort of pushes everything down. And I was like, oh, that sounds great for a lot of reasons.
Right.
And so I said, are there side effects? And he said, it's, there is a side effect called tardive dyskinesia that has a black box warning for, but he said, I give it a lot. I've never had a patient develop tardive dyskinesia.
Hey, Sad,
So,
my husband just said the baby's really hungry, so he wants to move her downstairs. You mind if I run upstairs? Do you think that'll be okay?
oh, do your thing.
Okay.
Yeah, do your thing. No problem.
Hey, Mike. Yeah. You can bring her downstairs. I'll come up here. Poor baby. I'm gonna see. What? Okay. Should have considered that it was almost her bedtime.
Oh.
Okay.
Where in Arizona
I'm
are
in
you?
Phoenix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been through there, I've been there for a day, but I haven't spent a lot of time in Phoenix. I hear a lot about Phoenix as a real estate agent because I know that was one of the hot spots where I think Zillow was buying up property like gangbusters there, and some other big venture capital firms were buying up suburbs there. But anyway, so he said the black box warning is for tardive dyskinesia, but I've never had anyone develop that. So just keep an eye out. And my mentality on that was like, I've had surgeries. I've taken a lot of medications over the years. I've never had a serious side effect really, or any side effect from a drug. And he's not concerned about it. So I wasn't concerned about it. So, and also I had the knowledge that other people take 5 milligrams 3 times a day, and some of those people a lot of those people don't develop issues. So that I know of, so I didn't have a lot of fear. Right. So I remember the first night I took it laying down in bed, and I was afraid of having heartburn that night, and I was just a little jumpy going to sleep. So when I say that, like, how sometimes you will, even if you're neurotypical, as you're falling asleep, sometimes you'll kind of jerk a little bit.
Yeah, like those
hypnagogic
jerks.
The
hypnagogic jerks, which is, somewhat severe. It's normal. Yeah.
It is normal. Everyone does it. So I felt like I was doing that maybe a little bit more than usual. And that was not scary to me. Right. So that would always happen when I would take it. And I would take it once or twice a week, or sometimes I go weeks without taking it. And probably 8 months went by, and then I got in a phase where my heartburn was sort of progressively getting worse. It was painful, and I couldn't sleep. And I was like, every time I take the Reglan, it helps. I don't know why I'm skipping it. I just need to start taking it every day, and then I'll heal, and then I'll be able to get off some of these other drugs. So I started taking 1 5 milligram pill before bed every day. I did this for like a month, and no real problems. And then there's one night I took it, and I got some weird feelings I never felt before, but still I wasn't scared because I'd taken it, 100 times and no issues. So probably the next week when I took it again, I wasn't sure. Sometimes I would take it before dinner, and sometimes I would take it before bed. And I wasn't sure when I went to bed if I had taken it before dinner or not. But my thought was, it's several hours apart. A lot of people take 3 times this much every day for a long time. Even if I probably didn't take it, but even if I did, there's no harm in taking another 5 milligrams before bed. So I woke up in the middle of the night that night, went to sleep great. Probably a couple hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I felt like my heart was racing. This is the strangest thing you've ever heard. Felt like my heart was racing. And I checked my pulse, and my pulse was normal. It almost felt like, this is another hillbilly analogy, but have you ever been electrocuted?
Very mildly, yeah.
So I would run into electric fences from time to time on the farm when I was a kid. So you have this alternating current that you feel when you're electrocuted, and it's got a pulse to it. It's like it's a click, right? And you've probably heard that or seen that, like if you're jumping the battery and there's sparks, that kind of thing. And I felt like it kind of felt like my heart racing. It kind of felt like electrical current in my chest.
Like
it was this weird,
fluttering almost.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like, if it was my heart, it was like 250 beats per minute. It was crazy, right? So then I checked my heart, and my heart rate was like 75. And then
because even
I ended up starting.
Even
what?
if you feel like that's just so interesting, because even like when their heart's racing for any other reason, their heart usually is going faster, right?
Mm-hmm. So I don't think my heart was actually racing. It was either like intensely stimulated esophageal contractions, or I was actually feeling the electrical impulses traveling down that vagus nerve. That's what I think it was, right, honestly. But the other thing that happened is I couldn't sit still. It was like this big adrenaline burst. I mean, the way you would feel if you wake up, like you're dead asleep and you wake up and you're standing on an airplane and the door's open and somebody's about to push you out. It was that intense. And it was like a nightmare. It was just this feeling that I had that there was no control.
Was it super uncomfortable?
It was incredibly uncomfortable. And I got up, I was literally running around my house, and I couldn't slow down. I couldn't calm down. I couldn't sit still. It was like I wanted to peel my skin off or something. Like I wanted to jump out of my skin, and there was nothing that I could do, no matter what, to calm that down. And I know that sounds like a panic attack. It wasn't. It was not your garden variety panic attack. It was like nothing I had ever felt before.
Honestly, because I had a similar. So my first symptom was like the crazy insomnia. And then I woke up in the middle of the night one night with that just insane sensation. It almost was like in my chest. But I didn't feel like my heart was pumping fast. It felt like the fear you might feel like, and I've always said, like if when you're just about to get into a car accident and you really think you're just about to when you're cut off, or you're just about to get into a car accident and you get that very momentary, just like dropping feeling,
but continuous
all day, every day.
Yes, that's a great analogy.
It is. It's the worst sensation. And it's not painful. It's not painful in the sense that like, it's just not what we think of as pain. And I didn't, what was strange was it came out of absolute nowhere. I mean, it was in the middle of the night while I was sleeping, and I couldn't sit still, but it's so funny because it almost seems like you had like this fight response. And again, this is in no way, even from like my experience with patients having panic attacks, I didn't necessarily feel like I was dying. I didn't feel like my heart was racing. It just seems like a very different clinical presentation all the way around.
I would agree. So you could have really observed that when you were experiencing it. It was different for you than anything you would expect, like from a patient or client.
The first thing I told my husband was, this is neurological. This is not psychiatric, because what you see with anxiety, and if it was anxiety, no shame in the game. Like, this is like I would gladly take medication to help me with whatever it is. The only thing I wanted was that sensation to go away. But I told my husband, this is not psychiatric. This is neurological, because
it's deeper.
It was something out of this world. Because what you see normally with anxiety is a build up and build up and build up. Somebody who's had anxiety, kind of free floating. Panic attacks, they can come out of nowhere. Like, somebody once told me, like, they were vacationing in Hawaii And out of nowhere, they had a panic attack, and it was the scariest thing. They thought they were dying. So the panic attacks can come out of nowhere, but it was just different. My heart wasn't racing. I didn't feel like I was dying. The only symptom I really had was that just insane sensation, and I couldn't sit still. Like I would walk around, but in another sense, I was also like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah. Yeah. And there was some neurological sort of terror associated with that, but then I'm sure it created some anxiety, actual anxiety on top of that, because you felt like there's nothing you could do to slow it down or calm it down. At least it did for me.
Well, the one thing, yes, I think, yeah, and that's hard. That's where it becomes hard to differentiate, because
Yeah, it's hard to know where the line
it
is, for
is,
sure.
because one of the symptoms of panic disorder, which is people who have panic attacks, is the
Mm-hmm.
fear of having a panic attack. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to have that criteria to meet criteria. That being said, panic attacks last 20 to 30 minutes. That's kind of the course
Mm-hmm.
of a panic attack. Um, this simply did not last 20 to 30 minutes. This would last for hours and hours and hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you have other symptoms other than the restlessness and what felt like this, like neurological anxiety? I heard someone else describe it as chemical terror. I thought that was a good name
It's
for it.
complete chemical terror. I mean, I don't know what else to describe. Like you've described, like being out on an airplane and like feeling like you're going to get pushed, or feeling like you're just about to get hit by a car. That sounds like terror to me. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and chemical terror, I think, is a great way to put it, because it feels like there's absolutely nothing you can do to control it. I would do all the
Correct.
things that I know to do as a therapist and as a human to calm my nervous system, take
Mm-hmm.
warm baths. I would go out on walks. Those are everything that would like help me, pre-Reglan, to
Yep.
just feel good. And that didn't even touch it.
Nope. Because it's not like you said, it's not psychological. It's not like you're on an airplane and you're afraid of flying. It's your body's doing something independently of any cognitive process, and the fear and anxiety that you have is in response to what your body's
Right.
doing, in some sense. And in some sense, I think it's directly happening in your mind chemically, on sort of this other layer too. So other than that experience, did you have any other depression, depersonalization? Did you have any physical neurological symptoms or anything like that?
Yeah, and it seemed like it's hard to know what was very acutely the sleep deprivation caused by the Reglan,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, I went from sleeping fine. I mean, sleeping fine meaning like when I could sleep, like when the baby was sleeping or with her dad or whatever, I was able to sleep just fine, when I could. And I had that sleep inertia where I was able to go to sleep very
Yeah.
quickly. And then Reglan just completely destroyed that. So I couldn't nap at all during the day, which is crucial when you have a newborn. I couldn't sleep at night. So, and I did notice that my symptoms got worse every single day. It was kind of actually really scary to watch, because every day I
Mm-hmm.
started having more difficulty cognitively. I felt more and
Mm-hmm.
more impaired, which was really scary for my family to watch. And they can't see the inside of my brain.
No.
My husband likes to say, "You
No.
weren't bleeding from anywhere." Like I couldn't see the dysfunction, but so that was a really scary part. But yeah, at one point, so I didn't sleep for days and days and days. And then at one point, I couldn't concentrate. I realized I couldn't even drive. Um,
Mm. I couldn't either.
there is about a period of probably a week where I knew I couldn't drive. I couldn't, I just couldn't think. Like it was such a bizarre, like it was just a complete inability to think. And but I would be able to form sentences, and like it almost appeared to other people like I was okay. Although there are some indications like I couldn't,
Mm.
sometimes I couldn't recall words. So like this is a word you
Mm-hmm.
use all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of complicated. And there are times where I would have almost moments of feeling okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's like whatever in my nervous system just kind of chilled out for like a little bit of time. And it was usually in the early afternoon. I'm not sure why. But I would have a period between like 1 and 4 or 5 where I wouldn't be okay, but I wouldn't have that sensation, and that's really all that I cared to be gone. Um, so the cognitive impairment. At one point, I woke up and I was moving really slowly, I was moving really slowly, and like I would stand up, and like it was so bizarre, and my face was just like almost like flat. My affect was completely flat. And it was really scary because I knew that it was, and it was so strange and scary. It was very like Parkinsonian, as some might
Mm-hmm.
um, some might suggest. So that was scary. Other symptoms, there were periods where it's as if like I completely lost all motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It was as if like all the dopamine in my body was just stripped away. And I would
Mm-hmm.
have no motivation to do anything, no motivation to see friends that I talked to all day, every day. At one point, my friend asked me to go to Panera because she knew I was having like something was going on. And by the time she got to my house, I had forgotten that we were going to go to Panera. And I was almost disappointed that we were going to go because I had no desire to hang out with her or eat. I had no appetite
Yeah.
whatsoever. I didn't eat for days. Um,
Are you familiar with the rat dopamine study? They somehow figured out how to deprive rat brains of dopamine entirely.
there's lots of studies on dopamine and rats.
So,
Yeah.
the one that I'm thinking of is like these rats basically had no dopamine, and there was food that was set right beside them that they just a couple feet away that they could easily get to, and they had so little motivation that they just withered away and died of starvation rather than get up and eat the food.
Yeah. That's really, really scary.
So I think, Lindsay, I think in the way we communicate with each other, our sort of modern discourse, we all use hyperbole a lot. We use these colorful expressions to talk about like how sad we are, how unmotivated we are. And I think when you have an experience like what you're describing, or what we've all gone through with Reglan, it strips the power from the words that you use to describe what you actually went through.
I don't think there's
When you
any accurate way to I don't think you can overstate how torturous the experience of being on Reglan was.
No, people are going to wince at me when I say this, but I would much rather go through like heroin withdrawal than the akathisia and well, everything that's entailed. Akathisia is for lack of a better word, but everything involved in what happens to you after you've had this drug. It's very similar. Honestly, I've done reading, and it seems very similar to the withdrawal that folks go through when they're on long-term benzodiazepine use, and then they discontinue. Yeah. They go through akathisia. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see how it might be similar. I kind of wish that I could. I'm not going to try, but it would be really cool to know, like, what are those differences. And it's so funny that you said you would rather go through heroin withdrawal, because I would tell, and I can't relate to that. I don't know exactly what that's like personally. I've seen it from my patients. They're completely miserable, but they're usually miserable for a couple days. So I was miserable for like 6 months.
So the reason that I say that specifically is with opioid withdrawal, you feel like you have the flu, you have pain, you have increased just pain everywhere, you have sweats, you have DTs, and you kind of feel like you're going crazy, but there's some part of you that still has your mind. You're still you. You're just a you who's
right.
Suffering.
You're a you who's really sick.
Exactly. This you're not you anymore. No. There's no part of you that's like, okay, I know what's happening here. I feel bad. I can push through this. There's no psychological trick or anything you can do to give yourself the momentum to get through it, because it affects you on such a sort of deep neurological level that there's no influencing your mind. And I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds like you should meditate, you should run, you should pray, you should eat clean. And I agree with all those things, but there is chemical and structural changes that happen in your brain as a result of this drug that the only thing that improves it is time.
And you know what? Like, if I had never experienced that and I was watching this interview, I would probably be like, ugh. Sounds like they were depressed and anxious. And it makes me just want to talk to everybody and be like, I'm telling you, like, this is so extremely different than anything I've ever seen. I'm sorry, I just can't overstate just how horrible it was. But there is something. I often said when I was going through this that I would if I could just lose a limb right now and everything would go back to normal, I would take that in an instant.
I told my wife that multiple times a week.
That you would rather lose a limb?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why if I could just like lose a limb right now and everything be fine, I would take it. If somebody offered me ECT treatment right now, which like stimulates the brain, I would take it right now. Like, I didn't know, like, if I could just shock, like, my brain would like back to normal.
Oh, listen, I called a doctor's office who does that and asked him if they would do it.
Are you serious? Yeah. I was ready to be like, anything to like shock my brain back to normal, like, because it can be really effective for folks who have treatment resistant depression. So I'm like, I don't know, like, I didn't think that would have.
There are consequences to that, though. And it doesn't always have good outcomes.
Right, but at that point, I was willing to risk that because I was desperate.
Yeah. I will say I've never... So I'll share a little more of my experience. I think it affects everyone. There are themes for everyone, but there are subtle differences in what symptoms are more emphasized or less emphasized in different people. So I had this chemical terror and this inner restlessness and this anxiety that just was just this deep neurological thing, not like panic attack or any. It's hard to differentiate, because the thing about panic is you do feel out of control and you do feel like you might be dying.
Right.
But this is so different from that I don't know if the English language has words to differentiate it.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard. And I think what I keep going back to is, regardless of what we call it, because I do believe in my gut that this is not a panic attack.
No, it wasn't.
What we do know is that after taking this drug, we experienced this thing that I never want anyone to experience again.
Right. And that's why I want to have these conversations. Honestly, it's the drug is generic. There are a lot of makers of this drug. There are a lot of well-meaning doctors that prescribe it. My interest is not, honestly, it's not a class action lawsuit. I'm not after money. What I want is for no one to ever be given this drug again.
I want for the ER doctor, for example, that saw me. He diagnosed me with an adverse reaction. He was a little skeptical, but he also was like, what else? Like, there was no really any other reason. I mean, I wasn't, you might consider postpartum depression or anxiety, but for me to immediately have had those symptoms right after Reglan, for me to not have the typical intrusive thoughts or negative alterations to my cognition related to my relationship with my baby or caring for my baby. I didn't have any of that. So that didn't really make sense. So, but my doctor was still very skeptical and didn't really know what to think, because his last words to me were, or one of his last words to me were that, we give Reglan all the time in the hospital and we've never seen this. My husband likes to say that he said, Reglan is a great drug. It cures people's GI issues. And so he was a little surprised. And I replay that conversation so often because it makes me terrified for people.
Yeah. Well, I think as a physician, you have the guidelines, the clinical guidelines for different symptom profiles that you follow. And there's sort of buckets and categories that people fall in, and you try to figure out what the best category is for how they're presenting, and then you try to apply the treatment for that.
Yeah, they're like clusters of symptoms, right?
Yeah. So it's like when we go into a doctor's office and we're presenting with a certain set of symptoms, they're just trying to figure out what we're like, according to what they know, where we fit with what we're telling them, right? So it's like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right. Yeah.
That's the only thing they understand. Right. And I don't mean say that to be disparaging of doctors. It's the nature of human beings. I went into my general GP's office explaining, that I just had this out of control, just internal, just motor going and anxiety and all these weird neurological symptoms I'd never felt before. And I said it started when I took this dose of Reglan, and they were like, "When did you take it?" And I was like, "Last week." And he was like, "Well, it would be out of your system by now." And I was like, "I know it's out of my system, but it changed my system." And so they gave me a 3-day supply of 1/4 milligram of Xanax. And my thought was, I'll take this for 3 days and it'll settle me down. And then when it wears off, I'll be fine.
Right.
I just need some relief so I can snap out of this. Mm-hmm. And so I took 1/4 milligram twice a day for 3 days, small. And it sort of made it was small, but it sort of made me feel like me again. And then when it wore off, I was probably 10 times worse than I was before I started taking it. Yeah, it was unbelievable. So I figured out that the only thing initially that I could find that would take any edge off whatsoever, and when I say take the edge off, I mean go from 100% like awful to like 97%
What I like
awful.
to say is, because my doctor also gave me 3 pills of a 1/4 milligram of Xanax. And I told myself, I am not going to take this unless I have that. Because the terror sensation didn't last. That was one of my first symptoms to kind of be really serious and one of the first symptoms to dissipate. But I told myself, I will not take this unless I get the sensation again, because that sensation is the only sensation that made me want to die. And like,
Yeah.
that was the very, very scary symptom. So that's how I felt, because what I didn't want is to take them when I didn't have that sensation, although I was miserable outside of that sensation, and then take those 3 Xanax pills, and then that sensation would come back. And that is the number one thing I didn't want to feel again.
I sort of figured that out pretty quickly. So what I started doing was taking Benadryl. Benadryl would normally knock a person out, but I would keep I would have a bottle of Benadryl, and I'd be driving down the road, and I would start to get that feeling, and I would take a couple Benadryl. It would take the edge off a little bit, and I was just like shoveling Benadryl.
That's so funny.
I mean, I know that sounds insane, but it's just how desperate I was. Like, I would have lost a limb, right? So
my doctor, the ER doctor, for my adverse reaction, I was pissed at him. He prescribed me Benadryl for the adverse reaction, and he didn't really give me the option. He just gave it to me. And
when they give Reglan, when they give an IV push of Reglan for like a headache or anything, they're supposed to push Benadryl with it, and then push the Reglan very slowly. And it seems like a lot of people who have these long-term side effects from the single IV dose of Reglan, they don't give the Benadryl, or they push it too quickly.
Yeah, that's what the ER nurse told me. But they gave me the Benadryl and didn't really explain that, like, why the Benadryl might help. Because honestly, to me, I kind of laughed at it, because I was like, do you know the severity of my symptoms? I haven't slept in a week, and you're giving me freaking Benadryl. So, I was not one of those people that slammed Benadryl. I was like, fuck that.
Yeah, well, it was just desperation for me. I didn't have anything else that I could take, and it was like I said, it took it from 100% awful to like 98, 97% awful, and it was like I would take that tiny little micron of relief, you know. So, and then the other thing that I tried was valerian root. And it was sort of like a milder benzodiazepine, like much milder. And a lot of time, like, if I was just like uncomfortable, it would kind of help. But if I was what you described, it wouldn't touch it. It was like I didn't take anything. But it did upset my stomach, so I quit that too. So what happened? So I'll kind of take you through my sort of progression after that night. I was sort of restless all day the next day, but that insane out of control feeling wasn't there. So the next couple of days I thought, okay, this will wear off. And so I started sleeping upstairs in our guest room so that I wasn't flopping around keeping my wife awake, because she's a light sleeper. And the bed we have upstairs has one of those adjustable bases that also can kind of vibrate and do different, like it's got a light in it. And sometimes when I sleep in that bed, I'll accidentally hit the remote at night, and like I'll wake up sandwiched in, you know, in the where it stood up, you know, like the cartoon character. Or I'll turn the vibrate function on in my sleep, and I'm like, what the heck? And then I'll find the remote and turn it off. So probably 3 or 4 days after I took the Reglan, I had this weird buzzing feeling in my foot, just my right foot. And it was really uncomfortable. And it would just like buzz and stop, buzz, stop, buzz, stop. It really felt like when you were a kid, did anyone ever do the like fake handshake thing to you where they pretend like they're shaking your hand, but they got the little electric thing and they kind of shock you a little bit? That's what it felt like, just over and over and over and over again all day. It was kind of like water torture. Like, it was like, it wouldn't have been bad if it happened once, but it happens continuously all day. It kind of wears on you. But I was like, this will go away. You know, I wasn't terrified of it. And I went to sleep that night, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and the bed was vibrating, very intensely. And I was like, dang it, I turned the bed on, and I looked for the remote, and I found the remote, and I started pressing the button, and I realized that I hadn't turned it on. It was my body.
Wow.
It was my entire body, and it felt exactly like when that bed shakes. Enough that it tricked me. It was this. It wasn't like a nervous tremor. It was like such a high frequency buzz internally. It was just like the bed.
Right. And we've seen other people on the page report that symptom.
It was horrible. Okay. And that came with this incredible like anxiety, chemical terror feeling. And I could not make it stop. I didn't go back to sleep that night. And that sort of continued. Like, I would get these waves of my body buzzing. Sometimes my body wasn't buzzing, but the restlessness and anxiety was out of control. And then I'll tell you, I'm not someone that's ever suffered with depression. I've been sort of sad after I've lost friends and family members, like for a couple weeks where you're grieving and just you're not interested in anything, and it's kind of like depression. Right. But I've never had clinical depression where it's just like you're in this nihilistic despair for no reason, or maybe it is for a reason, but it's this like constant flat thing. But I started having in the way that a person can have a panic attack, I would have depressive attacks. It was depression with the kind of intensity that you have in a panic attack where you feel like you're going to maybe die, like you're having a heart attack. But it was like this like fatalistic, like life is not worth living. And it's like, I'm not going to do anything to harm myself because it's not even worth getting off this couch.
Wow. Like, you know complete what I mean? Just immobility.
Completely. Yeah. And in this sort of inner just darkness and loneliness that, I mean, it was just like everything good that a person can feel in their soul was just gone. Like something took it from you.
What's super scary about that from my perspective is it was almost like a light, like being turned on and off. Because there were moments where I wasn't happy, but there were moments where it was like, okay, things are okay. And then, it would go into total despair. And it would last for maybe several hours or maybe even a couple of days. And then it would kind of let up again. But it was totally outside of my control and totally not, connected to any life events. So similarly for me, like I'll get sad and maybe like have a little bit less motivation if like I'm not going to the gym as regularly, or if somebody in my family is sick and I'm just like having to take care of them and I might be a little run down. So I can usually trace like my mood based on like life events. But this was totally the depression, despair, that I felt was just totally outside of any life events.
Yeah. Same here.
So.
And I also had, you mentioned Parkinsonism. This drug can cause Parkinsonism, like Parkinson's symptoms. It doesn't cause the disease, but you can have sort of that experience. And I had a mild touch of that. Like, I'm a musician, I'm a guitar player. I have been since I was a kid. And for months, I couldn't play a guitar. My hands
you weren't like dexterous enough. You weren't.
Nope. I could perform like normal functions, but anything that required dexterity, like I couldn't do. I remember being in my wife's family's Thanksgiving and going through like the buffet line, and like I was having a hard time picking up the food to get it on my plate because I kept like dropping it. And that was scary. And I'll tell you, I never did develop like tics, like the dyskinesia.
You developed tics.
So not really. I mean, there were times like I remember I was showing this property to some clients. It was a big farm property, and while I was driving there, my thumb was just doing this, and I couldn't make it stop for like an hour. But I never had like what you see with people with tardive dyskinesia or like Tourette's type symptoms. I never had that. And I never started to develop that, and that's why I never saw any warning sign with the Reglan. It was like it was fine for a long time, and it was like a bomb went off in my brain one night. So you said you did develop tics?
I had it wasn't like the hypnagogic, or not hypnagogic. It was almost like hypnic jerks, but like during the day. I mean, my arm would flail, like my legs my toes would twitch. I had twitching just all day long, like at least, like every minute. It's hard because I lived with it for so long. I kind of had to forget about it because it was just all day long. But I would just twitch all the time, and it's very different than Tourette's because. And I'm not an expert in Tourette's, but I feel like there's a lot of like head movements and vocal tics. I didn't have any of that. It was a lot in my legs, in my arms, my torso. The weirdest ones were my torso, where my torso would kind of twitch. So yeah, my doctor was in it. And what was interesting was my doctor prescribed Cogentin for that. Which is an anticholinergic. So it decreases activity in your brain. They give it to Parkinson's patients. So it's one of those medications, and it's also prescribed for and I don't use this word all the time. Pyramidal symptoms.
Is it pyramidal? I just see the word pyramid in there. I don't know. I've only read it.
I had a nurse. That's so funny. A nurse one time said pyramidal, so I've kind of feel like I've gone off of that. It was surprising when I heard it because I was thinking pyramidal too, but she prescribed that, which was very interesting because when I stopped taking that, because at one point she took me off of it even though they weren't gone, but I was on so many different medications. They took me off of it, and then right after she took me off of it, they went away. So I'm almost thinking like maybe I had like a paradoxical reaction to that. I don't know. But yeah, that was just a frustrating symptom. Like if that lasted the rest of my life and everything else never came back, I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, I get it. So the internal vibrations, the feeling like I was being electrocuted in all my limbs, the restlessness, the not being able to sleep, the crazy anxiety, that didn't go away from me. I mean, to be honest with you, like I have some other friends in the group. There's new people that reach out to me every week that are just getting started, and they're disoriented, and they're like, what's happening to me? When will I be better? How long did it take you? I was one of those people.
Yeah, because you were like several months in your recovery. Yeah, I was one of those people that reached out to you. Because you seem like one of the more level-headed folks. I mean, to be honest, because there's a wide variety of people in those groups.
It's true, and people have other issues apart from what the Reglan does to them, and sometimes it's hard to sort of differentiate and drill down on it, but you know they're suffering, you want to be there for them. So something people ask me a lot is like, how long did it take for you to heal? And honestly, the whole experience for me, I wasn't thinking clearly during the time. I wasn't really experiencing time the way a normal person would, where it's like, oh, I remember 2 weeks ago we did this. It was only living in the moment, but also being depersonalized from the moment at the same time, all the time. So I actually have no sense of the process of getting better and how long that took. Because it wasn't like I woke up one day and I was better. It was something that was so gradual and so subtle that I almost didn't notice. I was just trying to do everything I could to push forward all the time. But I had all of these symptoms every day, and I remember we live like 5 minutes from a Costco. I remember starting to feel a little bit better, and I was like, that was the other thing. I couldn't be alone. I would freak out. I couldn't be alone at all. And I couldn't really drive or go anywhere. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to try to go to Costco and get some groceries. And I felt good driving over there, and I got my grocery cart and I'm pushing it, and I get like 2 aisles into the store, and my nervous system completely freaks out. Like panic attack for no reason. I love Costco. And I had to like run out of the building. Wow. I couldn't be in there. So even when I thought I was getting better, there were still these lingering.
I had some agoraphobia too, which was when things started getting better is when I started having the agoraphobia.
I couldn't be around crowds at all. Crowds freaked me out.
I never really thought consciously it was the crowds. But I just remember as I started getting better, and like me and my sister-in-law were hanging out, and we're like, well, we'll go to the mall. And we would go to the mall, and I would just want to go home within like 20, which I would stay at the mall all day long prior, and I do now.
Yeah.
But I would just have very short ability to stay at the mall or do anything that like was very pleasurable to me before. But yeah, I didn't, in the very beginning, I did not want to be alone. Like I would want people almost to like be touching me, like to that, at that point.
You just wanted to be, I wanted to be connected to something that wasn't inside my head. You know,
like grounded, like it kind of.
Yeah. Grounded is a good word for it.
But
and it didn't work totally, but it was better than being totally disconnected, right? I will say the buzzing, the internal tremor feeling, like when I was laying on the bed in there, and then I told you it was shaking. I did figure out that I could go out and sit in the car and turn the car on, and just like the subtle vibration of the car from the motor that you normally don't even notice, it would sort of mask the vibration a little bit so that I could sort of calm down a little bit. It was still happening, but I didn't feel it because my brain couldn't differentiate between my own nervous system vibrations in the car. And I got some relief from that at times. But you know, I remember laying in bed trying to play like binaural beats and or listen to music or meditate or just anything I could possibly do to calm down, any supplement I could take, and it was like nothing would touch it. And the scary thing was like that was before I had found the group, and every doctor I'd seen was like, it should be out of your system, you have anxiety, like no one understood. And I had never, like, I did hear about like akathisia as a term, and that some people it's just like you have akathisia forever, and it was like I can't do this.
Yeah,
like
this happened
I told my wife, like, and I never had a thought like this in my life, but I told my wife, like, I'm not suicidal. right? I'm not having thoughts of harming myself now. But I do know that if this is what life is forever, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that I told my husband. It got worse, and I did become suicidal. And that was a big red flag for my husband because I've never had suicidal thoughts in my entire life, which a lot of people do have passive suicidal thoughts, throughout their lifetime.
Yeah, I never
But I
did.
never did. And so when I told him, like, I can't live like this, and I would have it was so weird because there would be moments where I would have that sensation and I just couldn't live like that. And then the moment it would go away, I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm fine. Like I can live
Uh-huh.
like this. It sucks, but like I can
Yeah.
live like this. Come back and
Right.
be like, I want to
Right.
die right now. So it was like
Yep.
this
Cut off my legs.
cut off my leg,
Cut off my legs. Yep.
try TMS or
Yep.
ECT. I'd totally be down to try that. Um,
Yep.
it was yeah, the worst experience my entire life. And I tell people, like, I don't think there's something that I could go through that's worse.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to imagine something worse,
And
isn't
I
it?
don't there yeah, I don't think I can. Um,
Like I can imagine like being burned alive, but that lasts a few minutes. I can't imagine anything worse than this for a period of 6 months. This is the worst thing I really think this is the worst thing a person can endure that would
it's
last a period like that.
I think what I think about is like it's almost like what somebody might experience when they're actually undergoing torture, but
Hmm.
you're not. Your body is like torturing itself, and
Yep.
it's for months and months. My husband said once, I think the only thing worse than this is like getting hit by like a bus. And I told my husband, I was like, I wish I was hit by a bus.
Yeah. Hit me with the bus and give me the
Hit me with the
morphine.
bus because you know what? The ER doctors would love that shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Right.
would like actually be
Right.
invested in my treatment.
Yep. Yep. And with us, it's like, you need to go home. I don't know what to do with
I
you.
don't know. And it was towing a line because I know what's going to get you in the like I know what I could have said to get me in the hospital, but like I know I didn't fit
Hmm.
going into a psychiatric hospital. Like heck, I work in the don't put this in the interview because I freaking work at a psychiatric hospital, so that'd be really awkward to go into the psychiatric hospital that you treat people in. Um but yeah, it was scary because I wanted to say enough for them to take me seriously, but I did not want them to take me, you know,
Why don't put that in the interview?
it, because it's a great question. Um,
So I'll be honest with you. I don't want to tell people that I had the thoughts that I had. I don't want to tell people that I had the feelings that I had. But I feel like those sort of intense internal experiences and perspectives are really the ones that people need to hear.
yeah, and I don't. For me, the way I like to think about the suicidal thoughts is there's nothing that I did or didn't do. Like, there's nothing I did wrong, to
Nope.
cause me to feel like this. Like, I was a postpartum mom. I was doing pretty good, like run down, but like, so is every other postpartum mom. And I was enjoying my baby. And I was able to provide a life for her that I really didn't get growing up. Like I grew up in I grew up in poverty. So I was in this like new phase of my life that was supposed to be very beautiful, and it was totally stripped away from me.
Hearing this, I remember you reaching out to me now. I remember this story. Um, so that must have been like another layer for you that was sort of crushing because it was like you have this time with a newborn that you'll never get back. and you really want to savor and appreciate that time and build those sort of bonds and memories. And I'm sure it felt like the worst possible time for you to be feeling the way that you were.
Yeah.
And you probably felt like also a sense of responsibility to be a mother to your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like you couldn't really do that the way that you were supposed to. And I'm sure that must have crushed you.
Yeah, it was very crushing because I'm 28 years old. Some people have their babies younger, older, but I feel like I was very judicious in deciding, when I was going to have a baby, under what circumstances. And I really wanted to make sure that I was in a good place to be the best mom that I can be. And for that to be taken away from me and I didn't do anything wrong, it's devastating, and it's something that I still deal with as far as like post-traumatic stress issues from that whole debacle.
So did your husband sort of step up during that time, or how did you
He had
cope
no
and
choice.
deal
He
with?
had no choice. Yeah, it was very hard on everyone because he was working full time, and he had to, he would get up through the night, but at one point I was so completely debilitated and it wasn't until somebody asked me, um, can you take care of the baby? And I was just like, no, I can't. Like, all of a sudden I couldn't feed her. Like, it wasn't that I just couldn't feed her. I couldn't do anything. Like, I couldn't do anything that required any emotional capacity. And I noticed over several days that I couldn't, that I was passing her off a lot, but I wasn't able to do other things in my life either. But I was passing her off a lot. I couldn't take, because she had a hard time feeding. She was premature. I had a hard time sitting there for an hour and trying to get this milk down her throat. Like, it was endless. But yeah, at one point I couldn't take care of her at all. I had to call in. My relatives were on a rotation. My mother-in-law would come on, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then my sister-in-law would take care of her and her boyfriend at the time. And then I had to call out my my stepmom from Virginia to come take care of her, and she stayed here for a week. And because and that's a point of pride for me, like, as a mom, as somebody who endured what I did from my childhood, like, normal me, no, I can take care of my kid, and I'm going to take care of her really well. But I knew that I couldn't. And I unfortunately had to put my pride aside. The baby had to be taken care of. So I had to put all that aside and say out loud, like, no, I can't take care of her.
Did you feel like your family came to understand what you were going through?
I still don't think they understand what I went through. No. I think my husband, he wasn't wrong. He just said, I don't know what's going wrong with her. I think she's having a reaction to this medication. We need help. And everybody, even my grandma, will say, like, I thought you were going through postpartum depression. And most people thought that's maybe what was going on, but they never asked me. They never asked me those questions, which was really interesting because they're here taking care of my baby and I'm sitting next to them. And they really didn't ask me those questions. And I don't blame them because they didn't know what was going on. It was scary. They knew it was very different than, my normal baseline. So I think they were just as scared and also don't always have the emotional language that I do as a therapist. But yeah, my husband, he works a very challenging job with long hours, and then taking care of the baby through the night and then also trying to take care of me emotionally. It was very taxing on our whole family. Yeah.
They were just sort of doing what they had to
It
do.
was survival mode. It was complete
Yeah.
survival mode. And we didn't really have the end in sight. Like we couldn't see the finish line because we didn't know what was going on.
Right. That's the scary thing, right? You don't know, you don't see light at the end of that tunnel. You don't know if you'll get better. You don't know if you won't. You're just trying to get through the
Yeah.
day and make sure your baby's taken care of. How did you find the group?
The first day, actually, I think I might have even looked it up before I had the insane insomnia because I started just feeling different. Or maybe, no, it was a few days into having insomnia where I was just, I don't know why I had the thought, but I just typed in Reglan support group in Facebook. And I will never forget, I was in my grandmother's house and just flippantly typed that in. And the moment I started reading, and this was not helpful in any way, shape, or form, everybody told me, including the therapist that I started seeing, was that it's the worst thing you can do for yourself. Include the ER doctor also told me this, so I understand that. So it was anxiety producing, and in the same vein, I think I needed to see that I wasn't alone.
Yeah, I found it, and I was obsessed with it. And the reason I was obsessed with it was because there was no other place on earth that there was any description or a tiny little inkling of understanding of what I was going through. So I think you look through it to understand it. You look through it to not feel alone. You look through it for hope. But then you have these people where, I don't know if you saw this. I think I was in the group quite a while before you were, but there was actually a girl who would comment in there who did commit suicide.
A woman that actually posted, or is it that woman that posts about her daughter-in-law who killed herself?
Oh, maybe it was. I thought there was a woman who actually posted.
Okay.
Because someone said, I remember seeing someone say, how is so-and-so doing? And then the comments below were like,
it was nothing. I
gone.
saw that, but I know exactly what you're talking about, but there was no resolve. And when you look at her profile, you can't see anything.
So it seems like I did some digging, and I think she did end her life.
Are you?
And I did look up her. I did a search for her in the group, and you can search groups for names, and you can find people's posts. And she had posted there in the past. Now this is months ago, so my memory is a little bit fuzzy. Don't hold me to this, but and then once I saw her name, I was like, oh, I've seen her comments before, and it kind of hit me. And that at that time, I felt like I was always trying to get people to understand that I wasn't just being dramatic.
Yeah.
That I wasn't just, I wanted people to understand that this is a real thing, and I was suffering as much as I was describing. And one of the ways that I would do that was find anecdotes for people in the group and say to my wife, like, here, look, this person had to give up her children. Look, this person committed suicide. Like, I would share like awful things that were happening. And to her, she would hear me saying like, look how scary this is. Look how awful this is. And she would see me sort of spiraling. And then it would also scare her, like afraid that I was going to harm myself or I would never get better. And she was overwhelmed. But at the same time, it was like, I was just saying these things over and over and over and over again, and it would never end. And it was overwhelming for her to the point where it was like, she could no longer really have much of an emotional reaction to what I was saying, because it was just like, it made her numb, because it just never, it would feel like it would never end. And there is such thing as compassion fatigue, and there is such thing as like just not knowing what to do, and you try to cope any way you can.
And you want someone to understand the gravity, how challenging it is, and how debilitating it is. Because, like I said, like I wish my husband could see like blood pouring out of me, like, because then
so he would understand.
But nobody, it seemed like on earth, like you said, could understand. And I did have friends that made, comments that just seemed to undermine just how traumatizing it was.
Well, I think people want to believe that if you try hard enough, you can just get better. They don't want to believe you're suffering that much, because what are the implications of that?
Right. Humans want things to make sense.
Right. And this doesn't make any sense. Exactly. People want things to make sense. That's a great way of saying it. So I say all those negative things about the group. On the other hand, to say there were people who I read their stories where it was like they got better, and they sort of, like, I joined the Akathisia Alliance group too, or Living with Akathisia, or whatever it's called. And I began to sort of put a roadmap together for me. Like, I didn't know if it would work, but I put sort of a roadmap together for how I was going to approach getting better. And that was helpful for me, just because it gave me a process to work and some hope. Even if I didn't know it was like, this is the right answer and this will work, if I could just commit to taking certain steps, I could think about those steps rather than just thinking about how much I was suffering. And so that was really helpful for me just to see that other people were healing and had healed. So talk to me about, and I know I said it's blurry for me, but talk to me about your sort of healing process and the things that you did that you feel like helped, and your just memory of how you progressed.
I think similarly, things move so slowly that it's really hard to like think about when things started getting better, or it is very blurry to me. So, and I often kick myself because people told me keep a journal of your symptoms so you can look back and like see that progress. I couldn't get myself to do it most of the time.
Yeah. I tried to do that. I would lay in bed and write like what kind of day I had and how I was feeling in the moment. And I thought I was doing it a lot, but now I try to dig through it, and it's like over a period of 6 months, I did it like 5 times.
Yeah, and I similarly had like a roadmap where I was like, okay, I'm going to journal, I'm going to commit to exercising, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z things, and like just throw everything that I know at it, and see where things go. But I mean, I was so debilitated, I couldn't keep up with what my expectations were.
Yep.
I was also very obsessed about different medications. So because I was very afraid of Reglan, of course, and every day seemed like it was so important every day was like almost a new science experiment.
Exactly.
Because
and
every night was a very important science experiment, because every night I went without sleep was another night that the next day I would wake up more cognitively impaired. So I did become very obsessed about like, what am I going to do for the next night? It was almost like I was in a war zone and I was just trying to survive. From the outside, I looked psychotic, probably. I don't know. I mean, very strange.
It's exactly like you're in a war zone.
I felt like I was in a war zone, and I'm like trying to throw grenades in the perfect places to hopefully survive. That's what it felt like internally. Not that I've ever been in a war zone, but I imagine that's what it would feel like. But so I was very obsessed.
So I'm going to stop you right there. This is an example of people use analogies, right? And you say, oh, it was like I was in a war zone. And people are like, wow, she's like, people will hear that and think you're being dramatic.
And that's what scares me is, because you could think I'm speaking in hyperbole, and a lot of people do. And
right. You're not.
And I'm a more extroverted person, and I like being dramatic at times in like my normal life, just because it makes good conversation and whatever. Like I enjoy having a fun time over a glass of wine, potentially, right? But when I say that it felt like being in a war zone, I am the least dramatic person. Like I'm
Right.
I try to be as accurate with my words when it comes to my experience as I can, as I am with in a lot of my professional life, and when I'm trying to be more serious. I try to be as accurate with my words, and I feel like that's been a real push that's been very important for me right now, because I don't want anybody to, I don't know, I just want to capture my experience as purely as I can.
No, I think that's important to describe it as accurately as possible, so people can understand.
Yeah. I mean,
So anyway, so it felt like you were in a war zone. You were looking for foxholes to survive
I
in,
was.
the right places to throw grenades, and every day was a science experiment. And all this is familiar to me.
Yeah.
But take me through that progression.
So initially we were trying. So initially, all I had access to, my only grenades were Benadryl, and then Benadryl wasn't working, so I was like, I need different grenades, and they're like, well, here's some propanolol. And I went to my GP, and they prescribed like 10 milligrams of propanolol, and I was like, fine, I'll take the propanolol. Didn't change anything. I think at one point I got hydroxyzine. They would give me like 25 milligrams of it, didn't touch it. 50 milligrams of it, didn't touch it. They said I could take 100 milligrams of it, and it didn't touch it. I just felt kind of like just weird. And honestly, weird was a lot better than what I was feeling, but it didn't really touch it. It wasn't until my second, so this whole time every day was horrendous, and I was not making any progress towards the enemy, like, for lack of a better words. I was making no progress. I was completely frantic. I went to the ER a second time. So they gave me Benadryl the first time. I went to the ER the second time. They were about to leave the room and not give me anything and say, go see someone for postpartum depression, until my friend said, you know what, Lindsay's just not normally really upbeat, bubbly. She's not sleeping. This is very abnormal for her. She was a pretty good advocate for me. And he was like, well, I could give her Ativan, which was the game changer. And at first I wasn't going to take it. I don't know what my thought process was exactly. There's a lot of, we think of benzos and we see a lot of akathisia with benzos. So I'm sure that was my fear. But my friend was like, no, you're taking this medication. So I was like, okay. And after I took Ativan, which has a longer half-life, I believe, and is a little bit stronger than Xanax.
It's the opposite.
I think it initially is a lot stronger than Xanax. Yes.
Yeah, it might initially be, but the impact of it really, from what I could tell, was about 4 hours. So the reason why Xanax is no longer prescribed as frequently is because Xanax takes about 15 minutes to kick in, and you really feel it hit you.
Very short half-life.
Well, no. So Klonopin and I forget what the other one is. Some of those have extremely long half-lives to where they last for days. And when people are on long-term benzodiazepine therapy, they have them on those drugs and the theory is when you taper, it takes a long time for them to leave your system, so it's easier to come off of them. Xanax is sort of like that in between, where Ativan is sort of really short. But in my experience, I've taken both. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and it gets fuzzy because, not fuzzy, I think it's complicated. Benzos all kind of do the same thing, but they're different in their half-lives and their intensity and what they're FDA approved for. Like temazepam's typically approved for, sleep in particular. So it gets complicated. But the nurse told me, I said, is it like Xanax? or something about Xanax, and she was like, it's actually stronger than Xanax. So that's where I'm getting that information from. And
Okay.
I did a little bit of research. It's complicated. Either way, they gave me Ativan.
I think Ativan is the most commonly used now. I think they think there's not as much abuse potential. I think it's just less stigmatized than
Yes,
Xanax.
that's for sure. It's also
Yeah,
more prescribed in the hospital system. Ativan's like the
correct.
benzo for the hospital system. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
so they prescribed me 2 milligrams a day to take it twice. So 1 milligram and then 1 milligram twice a day. So I took the 1 milligram pill, and they said it would induce sleepiness, that I would be sleepy, like right, when it kicked in. She said that they give it to a lot of people who are sleep deprived and
Mm-hmm.
or aggressive. Maybe they took a drug and they are deprived,
Mm-hmm.
like meth or something, and they use that to kind of chill them out. So I said, great. I honestly didn't believe him. I was like, I don't think you understand what I'm going through. And I took the 1 milligram, and I was right in that it did not put me to sleep, and I was not sleepy whatsoever. That was one of the scariest symptoms, not to get off track, but I didn't feel sleepy for months. Like that sensation of wanting to fall asleep. I didn't feel sleepy. Like even if I would fall asleep for like a few hours, I would wake up and I just never felt sleepy. But which was scary because I never felt rest for months. But they gave me the Ativan and I felt normal. It gave me this sensation of,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, I feel like myself. I think the exact words were
Yeah.
like, I'm back. Like this is like, it was like a moment of relief.
I had the same experience with
Yeah.
Xanax.
And and I took the second pill and I was actually able to sleep for like 6 hours. But mind you, this is after
Mm.
like 2.5, 3 weeks maybe of like sleeping 1 to 3 hours a night. So any normal
Yep.
person would have like crashed and slept like all day. But I got 6 hours of sleep. It was not restful sleep. It was what I like to describe like not akathisia, anesthesia sleep, where there's no restfulness. You're just out. And that was the day that changed my course. Not that it was great, because it was really, really horrible for months, but that was kind of like a big turning point for me. Was
It gave you hope.
it gave me hope. That was the day I stopped having suicidal thoughts, because that's when that sensation, the akathisia, the complete terror. I think that was one of the last days I had that sensation.
Oh,
Yeah, so that sensation was like the first to kind of come and be horrible, and that's like at 100%, right? The worst thing I could ever experience. Um, so that was a turning point for me. So I took 2 milligrams of Ativan every day for several weeks. So, which is
wow.
very
Okay.
different than a lot of people's experience. Like from what I've seen in the Reglan group, a lot of people prefer to take more of a holistic route and, not taking benzos, because it can be scary for a lot of people. For myself, I was very scared of benzos, mainly because I work with people who suffer from substance use disorders. And I see a lot of people who suffer from alcohol use disorder, opiate use disorder with the fentanyl pills. And more rarely do I see somebody with like a benzodiazepine use disorder, but I do see it. And kind of the talk of therapists is like, we want to avoid those substances whenever possible because of their addictive nature. Um, I remember having a conversation with a very well-respected therapist that I'm friends with, and I remember her telling me I would never take benzodiazepines in a million years, and I was right there with her, like, would never take them in a million years. And so when I was prescribed that, it was very, very scary, because I know I've seen people on the addiction side of it. As a therapist, we always want to avoid that. We want to it's not a red flag, but it's something to monitor when we have a patient.
People treat it as a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, you like you say the word Xanax, and you're in an addict bucket when you just say that
A little
to people.
bit, and there are stereotypes, especially when it comes to white young women.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
I think that just me, I think benzodiazepines are some of the most dangerous drugs in the world, if not the most dangerous drugs in the world. They're not going to kill you like if you get slightly too much, like fentanyl will. But there are only two substances that the withdrawals can kill you, and it's alcohol and benzodiazepines, because they both work on the same thing. It's GABA, right? But I've read stories of people being on long-term benzo use and literally taking like 5 years to taper. Like they get like micron scales and reduce their dose by the most infinitesimal amounts.
So
and I've also heard stories of like Jordan Peterson, who was on Klonopin for a long time, and then his wife got terminal cancer, and so he had his psychiatrist increase his Klonopin dose, and then it became paradoxical for him, so he had to get off of it. He didn't understand how dangerous it was, and when he quit, he had the sort of akathisia, the sort of experience we have with Reglan from the withdrawal, except I actually think his was worse. And he actually, I think he ended up, no one would help him here. No rehab place could help him. He went to, I think, like Russia or somewhere in Eastern Europe, and they put him in a medically induced coma for a long time so his body could detox without him being conscious. Like he was in a coma for weeks, I think, maybe months. And then he said when he woke up, his brain was just like he would wake up and he didn't know where he was, and then like he would see shoes and he would think like I'm supposed to put those on, but then he couldn't figure out how to put shoes on. Like
it messed him up. It completely messed him up.
So, but I don't think he's alone in that. I think he's just the most high profile person to speak out and articulate that.
Yeah.
Clearly. So I just say all that to say I feel the same way about benzodiazepines as you did, from your clinical experience.
Yeah, it was
before I went through this.
It was very scary. So I went into this trying to be as judicious as I could about taking them. But I mean, at that point I had some relief. So I was like, this isn't gonna ruin me overnight. So I think I took the 2 milligrams for about a week or 2 weeks until I got to see a neurologist, which I feel very lucky and privileged to have gotten to a neurologist in that time span, because I called several and no one could see me for like months. And so I was able to get in within 2 weeks, and hands down, that neurologist saved my life. Yeah.
Really? I saw a neurologist. It was a total waste of time.
And I've gotten I've heard that from a lot of people, that neurologists, for whatever reason, they're really in their head. I guess that's what they.
Oh, it's true. Specifically, that specialty.
There's something about them.
Exactly,
you have
right.
to be a specific kind of person to be a neurologist, evidently. But I remember, actually, I think sometimes I make even the experience less worse in my head because I just can't imagine. I can't think about how horrible it was because it just doesn't seem real almost.
I do the exact same thing. The only time I really feel aware of how bad it was is when I'm having conversations like this with somebody else who's already been through it. And even then I feel like I'm telling a story of like a movie that I saw. It doesn't quite seem like
this was my experience.
This was my experience, but I know that it was.
Because the reason why I say that is because I said that that was a turning point when I went to the ER the second time and that things started getting better. But then I'm reminded that it must not have been really good because on the way to the neurologist, I remember thinking, if this guy can't figure this out, I'm gonna end my life.
Yeah.
I was so desperate. So, but the Ativan was helping, but at the same time, it wasn't helping enough, evidently. But yeah, so I was really relying. That was kind of like the next step in my treatment is seeing the neurologist. And Dr. Hetrick absolutely saved my life. He says, I don't prescribe Reglan anymore. He said that he's seen some, what was the word? Not severe. It's a clinical term. There's like mild, moderate,
Acute.
mild, moderate, severe, and not extreme, but like
Yeah.
just they usually use this category when like people die from, I'll think of it another day. But he said he's seen some very extreme reactions to this medication, specifically in adolescents, which is interesting. But he said he doesn't prescribe it anymore because of the effects that he's seen. And that just made me feel like, okay, he understands. Like, he's a neurologist. He knows how these drugs work. Like, he knows brain chemistry. So
And just hearing that from him, that someone with a white coat on understood, saved your life.
yes, and like the treatment afterward.
What was the treatment was the Ativan, or what was the
So
treatment
he
from him?
continued Ativan at night for sleep. He went down from 2 milligrams to 1 milligram. And then he added propanolol. And I remember you being shocked by this, but he gave me 40 milligrams of propanolol 3 times a day. And you were like, I was on 1 milligram.
Yeah.
I was like, what even were you taking?
I was on
10.
10. I'm sorry. I was on 10 3 times a day. I misspoke. I will tell you that. So I have a doctor friend in Florida. Like, the doctors here, completely useless. They're all part of big bureaucratic practice groups that see 100 patients a day. They look at your chart the whole time. They hate their lives. I hate being there. It's disaster. But I have a friend who is a doctor in Florida who I would Zoom with, and we just have a lot of trust in one another, which is like, I'm always honored by that.
Yeah.
So I was describing to him what I was going through, and it seemed weird to him that metoclopramide would cause that, but he's sort of a scientist, so he started looking at the literature and looking at the chemical impacts of the drug and what all receptors it hits and stuff. And he knew some things about it that I didn't know, even though I'd spent like weeks on it. But he didn't understand really the experience of it. And so he was the one that gave me Xanax. And then I would take it, and I'm telling you, I would take it and I would feel like myself, and I would be hopeful for 2 or 3 days, and then it would wear off and I would feel worse than I did before I took it every single time. And so it became like a fire extinguisher for me. But I would go into it knowing that
it was going to be like that.
That it was going to be like that. Right. So I was careful about how I used it. But at that time I had never even heard the term akathisia. So I watched some presentations that this doctor had given at some conference about akathisia and how to treat it. And he talked about propranolol a lot. So I called, his name's Dr. Rosenberg. So I called Dr. Rosenberg. I was like, hey, I think what I have going on is akathisia, for lack of a better term. My experience isn't exactly what they describe, but it's closer to that than anything else. Can you send me some propranolol? And he was like, yeah, sure. It makes sense to me. So I started on the 10 3 times a day. And I can tell you, like, so much of my symptoms were physical. Yeah. The electrocution feeling, the buzzing feeling, the parkinsonism, the restlessness of not being able to sit still. And I had all the cognitive things, the depression, depersonalization, anxiety at the same time. But when my body was doing all that, I just felt so out of control, and just like I could never, like I was at the bottom of a well and I could never find the rope to just grab onto the bottom of it, right? I could never get any traction. And when he gave me the propranolol, it didn't fix at all what was happening in my brain, but it calmed my body down enough that I felt like, okay, this is still awful, but I can work with this.
Right. This thing that
and that was the thing, that the way the Ativan gave you hope, that was the thing that gave me hope, because it was like something that was helpful, that was non-addictive and wasn't a benzodiazepine.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, like in the group, will try the propranolol and they expect it to be
a miracle,
like a miracle, or even like a significant solution. And it's really not, but it does calm your body down, this sort of adrenaline response, to the point where it gives you the opportunity to work on your mind. That's what it was for me. It was okay. Now I'm actually present. Like, I'm miserable, but I'm sitting here.
right?
And I'm grounded a little, and I can think about what steps to take to heal. So
Right. Give some space to be able to work with what you're given. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah. And
exactly. So I think propranolol is like a tool in the toolbox for people.
but one tool like that isn't going to fix much of anything. My
Correct.
experience. So for me, I was given a lot of different drugs at the same time. And when I think about that, my first thought is like, they must have been pretty concerned for them to do that, because like any doctor, they'll try one medication and see how that goes, maybe increase the dose, then like maybe add on a second one, if that's not helping. But for me, I went from taking the Ativan and the Benadryl, I believe, maybe I wasn't taking the Benadryl at that point, to taking, and propranolol, the GP had prescribed some before I went to the ER. That gets a little jumbled, but I went from taking not a whole lot, to them throwing Ativan, a lot of propranolol, Cogentin, and Boost Bar at me.
And this was your neurologist?
And this was my neurologist.
Said-
No, they didn't prescribe. They didn't prescribe the Boost Bar at that point, but they put. And I just want to say all of this to say, like, there are tons of contraindications for medications, and everybody is completely different, and we are not providers of medication. So, like, the names of these medications mean nothing. This was just my experience, and everybody's experience is unique, and the medication for one person, even with the same exact disorder, might be different for someone else. So all that to say, the names of these meds mean nothing.
I just had that conversation maybe this morning or yesterday with another girl in the group who was asking me about medications and like, did this help you? Should I take this? And I just kind of said, I was like, I'll share my experience and what helped me, just like what you just said, but I can't tell you, like, you need to talk to your doctor about what to take. I can't be responsible for saying you should or shouldn't take this, because everyone's different.
Yeah.
I can tell you what doesn't work and what isn't helpful for me, just like you said. So I would agree with your qualifier there.
It means nothing because everybody's different. But in my experience, I was prescribed this cocktail of medications, and it's hard to know what helped and what didn't help. I mean, but 120 milligrams of propranolol a day must have done something. That's all I have.
That's a lot.
So they prescribed that, and by the next visit, I was like, I could tell just from how I felt in my body in that same chair that like things were different. Like things had calmed down. I was able to think more clearly, and I honestly was like, I think at that point I was like, this is okay. All that to say, I still wasn't sleeping. I just felt more okay than I did 3 weeks ago, right?
Mm.
So I was just glad I wasn't in that war zone anymore. Um, but
Still deployed, just not in combat.
yeah, still deployed non-combat. That's a great analogy. And at that
Yeah.
point, they're like, neurologists don't really like prescribing Ativan. I get it. That's not like their specialty. So within the same office, they employed neuropsychiatrists, or
Mm.
nurse practitioners. So basically, folks that had a knowledge of psychiatry and neurology, and so a lot of people who were like people who had strokes from the neurology, they would send them there. People who had, Parkinson's, that were being treated by the neurologist might see these people because they specialize in, a little bit different medication. So which was really awesome because they weren't just psychiatrists, right? They were kind of and I feel like that's kind of a perfect situation for me because I was having symptoms of akathisia and anxiety, whatever you want to call it. Like it just seemed like a perfect blend of what I needed. So
So how many months in were you when you started to get this kind of care?
I think so. I really I feel like I was as good of an advocate, I think, as anyone really could be. I wasn't shy. I tried to get in with doctors. I called doctors everywhere to see who would get me in faster. I really was pushy with the doctors. So my first symptom or my insomnia started March 16th. And I think I had seen the neuropsychiatry nurse practitioner by the end of May. So that's when I think my healing really began. Because the neurologist was trying to taper me off Ativan and I wasn't sleeping. Like I was doing everything I could, right, and I still wasn't sleeping. So, but that was my only like really severe symptom. So they were trying to taper me off that, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. And they were kind of looking at me like, well, you got to taper off a bit. And I'm like, I'm telling you, I can't. Like, and it's not like I don't want to take this medication. That's the last thing I want to do. But I also can't not sleep. Like that is very detrimental. So I will lose my mind like if I can't sleep.
I was afraid of being in that situation with benzos. I can tell you, it's funny. Probably September, October, I went to a GI to have a scope done at this of 2022, and when the nurse triaged me, I started like I was naming drug allergies, and so I said metoclopramide or Reglan, and then I just named everything else in that class. And she was kind of looking at me funny. She's like, "What happens when you take Reglan?" So I told her, and she said, "Same thing happened to my daughter." She said, I thought I was going to lose her. She said, we put her on Klonopin. That was the only thing that helped her. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
that's a horrible drug. And she's like, I know, but she was circling the drain.
Yeah.
That's the word she used, circling the drain. And it's just funny, like, how many people this affects. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people in that Facebook group. You think how many people are out there that don't even know about the group, and their doctors are all telling them that there's nothing wrong and they just have anxiety.
I posted just briefly on Facebook about how I was like recovering in a better place. It was scary, whatever. And I had a friend reach out to me and say, "Oh my goodness, I took that medication and I had a lot of those same symptoms, and she took it for milk production as well. And her doctor said that it was postpartum depression. And so she just assumed that all of her symptoms were related to that. But then she was like, wait a minute, like I did take Reglan and that's when it all started. So she was like, now I'm questioning whether that was it or not. So I think it takes I think it's easy to trust that, you know, it is this or that, or like a newer presentation of anxiety or depression, or postpartum depression, or whatever it is. But I think our experiences warrant there to be further dive into that, because half of the puzzle, I mean, medicine is ever evolving. A lot of the conditions that we know about now didn't exist 100 years ago. We didn't know they existed. So I think part of the problem is there is a lack of research.
No, the science is settled.
I think this
Doctors know what these doctors know what these drugs do.
I think the science, like, how do I phrase this? Like, we know about dopamine agonists, right? We know what they do. I think you might have got me. But at the same time, it is hard to differentiate when these situations are coinciding at the same time, and they can look very, very similar.
Well, Reglan is not this simple dopamine specific agonist. It has a cascading effect. It affects glutamate. It affects GABA. It affects specifically serotonin. It affects 5-HT4 receptors. And I told you about the rat study, right? With the NMDA receptors.
Yeah, and I think the thesis of that was that, like, they gave them a dopamine agonist, Haldol, right? And then they compared that to rats who had Haldol and Reglan, and it made
not exactly. So they gave the rats Haldol to see how they reacted, and then they had another group of rats that they administered only metoclopramide chronically over an extended period.
Okay.
After that extended period, then they gave him Haldol, and when they gave him the Haldol in the metoclopramide treated group, they went catatonic.
Right.
And the control group did not. And so the idea is chronic administration of metoclopramide does induce real changes in the brain that are measurable. So when they autopsied those mice that were in the experimental group, they found, for one thing, a much higher number of NMDA receptors in their brains. So this makes sense to me intuitively when you think about how benzodiazepines work when they open up that GABA channel and enhance the impact of GABA, and then so you got the seesaw. I mean, it's sort of rudimentary, but way psychiatrists explain it. There's a seesaw there's this balance between glutamate and GABA. Glutamate's excitatory, GABA's calming, right? And so when the GABA, like your brain sort of adapts to the constant presence of benzodiazepines, then it will lower the GABA, and you take it off, and it's like the balance of that shifted heavily in the favor of glutamate. And symptomatically, that looks like akathisia, or the symptoms I described what Jordan Peterson went through. And so this is like, rather than, to me, it seems like what Reglan does is it tips the seesaw in favor of glutamate the same way, but it does it by increasing glutamate rather than decreasing GABA. Although there is some discussion that it does have an impact on GABA, it's just there's not as much evidence for that.
So you've certainly done a ton more research on all of this than I have. I certainly remember GABA certainly was affected because
well, Right.
I feel like dopamine, is it dopamine and GABA kind of go hand in hand, or that they're
Uh, um, People think of dopamine as the like motivation
right?
reward
Sure.
hormone or chemical, and it is, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely educated on what all dopamine does. I mean, there's people who study dopamine for a living
Right.
still to this day. We don't really fully understand all of the roles that dopamine plays because you have what, 5 different types of dopamine receptors?
Yeah.
Isn't that what it is?
And I haven't even heard that. I'm very familiar with dopamine, the reward systems when it comes into addiction pathways, right?
Yeah,
Dopamine
right.
plays, a big part of that role. Um, but from what I remember, and my understanding is that most people, when they take Reglan, it increases the availability of dopamine, right?
Okay.
But
Well, I would think it blocks those dopamine receptors.
exactly.
So,
So some people have a paradoxical reaction, and that's the way
mhm,
my
mhm,
neurologist kind of explained it to me. Is that typically it causes an increase in dopamine. And looking at my symptomology, it almost looks like that's what started to happen because I started to have a little bit more
mm,
energy, a little bit more motivation.
mm.
That was different, and so that's why I thought,
I didn't have that
okay.
experience.
And that's why my first thought was, is this like a start of a hypomania? I'd never experienced that,
Mania,
but
yeah.
it was very subtle. I'm just very in tune with my body, and that was my fear. And then it just completely dumped. So it was as if I went from having a little bit more energy to it's hard to describe, and that sounds like a depression, but it was different because I had just complete insomnia. So it was as if had like zero dopamine whatsoever. So I started having the like Parkinson syndrome, Parkinson symptoms, the insomnia. So that's the reason why I think maybe dopamine and GABA might play a role, because it was as if there is nothing in my brain to allow me to sleep. Like all the GABA
I did
was like completely
I did
removed.
feel that. I The APRN that I see said she had another patient who was impacted by Reglan. And this person was like almost vegetative, like they just had no will to live.
Yeah.
And that was their main symptom. They couldn't drive, like they couldn't, not because they were anxious and scared, just they just didn't have the will to function. And she actually started that person on Wellbutrin, which is
It's dopamine,
like the way SSRIs are with serotonin, Wellbutrin affects
dopamine, and
dopamine
serotonin.
and norepinephrine. Yeah. And that person, like, it sort of kickstarted their life, and now they're like functioning normally again. So it is interesting the way it does affect different people. And I do know that the way people talk about it is like the reason it's a prokinetic is because it blocks a particular inhibitory dopamine receptor. And so it allows for like more of those muscle contractions. So I don't disagree with you, but I think the point between the two of us is it's really complex, the impact of what this drug does.
I think it would make a lot of sense to interview like a psychiatrist or a neurologist and somebody that really knows the literature, because because it gets really complicated, because not all literature should be thought of as equally as valid, and right, there are limitations in research
Mm-hmm.
studies. We have to look at, how outdated it is. Really, to understand the literature, you have to be steeped in the literature. That's not to say that like we don't know anything, and like none of our literature reviews mean anything, but I think that it would be helpful to hear from somebody who's steeped in that literature.
Yeah, and if I am going to have another mental health counselor. She's a PhD and teaches psychiatry type stuff. I am going to have her on, and I think I'm going to talk to my psych APRN. But I don't have someone who's a PhD who's really into the literature. If you know anyone, I would love to talk to him. But I am going to speak to several other folks who've had this experience, and I've thought about like, I don't know whether to put separate episodes with these conversations or to like cut it up into kind of a documentary style. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just trying to capture the content right now, and I think also personally, it's like it's good for us to have these real face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
So how are you now?
So I'm pretty good now. Yeah. So I think, after I saw I started seeing the lady who I still see. I started really incrementally improving. After 4 months, I would say I was like 80% better. And after 6 months, I was like 98% better. We're going on almost 10 months now, I guess, because it was March 16th. We're almost in February. So going on almost a year. And I'm doing pretty good. I'm take care of my baby fine. I'm working part-time. I'm kind of in that sandwich generation where I'm taking care of my mom and my grandmother, and then I'm taking care of my kiddo. So I'm doing pretty good. I think I still have some cognitive, just like I can't think of words as quickly all the time, and sometimes my memory isn't as good, like my short-term memory. I'll often tell my grandmother something and then be like, "Did I already tell you that?" And like oftentimes I did. So my memory, it just isn't there.
I do that, but I think I did that before too. I think I just pay more attention to it now.
I think that's some of it, and also like I don't know how much of it is from being a mom and carrying different.
Oh yeah, sure.
Carrying so much more information in my brain.
I think I can feel some of that coming back. I think I'm getting sharper. So are you still on any medication?
Yeah, I still take anti-anxiety medication. So I still take Boost Bar. I take, and I don't think it does much. I don't know. I don't really feel the need to go off of it because Boost Bar is and again, I am advocating for medication in that there is less adverse effects.
You're just sharing your experience.
I am just sharing truly, I'm just sharing my experience.
Yeah.
But Boost Bar is associated with much less adverse effects, and it's an anti-anxiety. So I think that helps some. Maybe, I don't know. And then I still have trouble sleeping, like even after all of this. There are just times where it'll be 3 a.m. and I still can't sleep. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I'll take hydroxyzine every once in a while. And when it gets really bad, I've taken Ativan. But me and my doctor had that understanding. But it's very rare. Yeah, so... But for a long period of time, I didn't have any symptoms really at all other than some memory issues. So it does seem to ebb and flow with certain life stressors, and that's okay. Yeah.
But you feel like life is good and livable now.
Life is great. I remember thinking, oh my God, if I get better from this, if I recover from this, like I am making some changes in my life. Like it's so weird, like people who have had near death experiences, I feel it's weird because I didn't have a near death experience in what we might typically think, like somebody nearly dying from a surgery or something like people dying in childbirth. Like I didn't have an experience like that, but the way I interpreted information, the way that I saw my situation. For me, it very much was an experience of like a near-death experience. So
I feel the same way.
so I often would think like, wow, like I would have thoughts like, wow, I know people are gonna die. I never thought I would die this way. Because I think at some point, like I thought I was going to die from this. I was also probably very anxious about just what it was I was experiencing. But I just remember thinking like, if I ever recover from this, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z things. And it's so freaking cool to be on the other side and be like, remember I told myself like, I'm going to do these things. I can do that. I'm like, I have 100% freedom and control. I have freedom of choice. I can do whatever I want. And I have complete 100% ability to do those things. I have all my everything that I need. So it's a really cool space to be in.
Yeah, and I'm sure you appreciate
I lost
it more.
that at your. Oh shoot, my phone's gonna die. Let me.
Okay.
I will be right back. We might have to reconnect for a minute. Okay. I'm
Okay.
gonna go get a.
I'm thinking we're going to wrap it up here in just a minute. Anyway,
I'm at 1% though, so.
Okay.
Whoop. Please, phone don't die. We made it. We're back.
What's up?
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I literally, as I was plugging it in, it died. But where were we?
You were just talking about how it was like a near-death experience to you in terms of the way it impacted your perspective on life now.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, like I said, it's not like I like died and was revived. But it certainly and like lived to tell the story. But I think it impacted me in similar ways because I thought I was going to die. I really did. Whether or not the drug was going to take my life or the side effect of the drug, which was akathisia, and which a symptom of severe akathisia is suicidal thoughts. And that's where I was.
You know, people hear the word akathisia, clinicians hear the word akathisia, and they think it's just like somebody who's restless.
Yeah, and we do see that a lot. Like I see people on certain drugs, antipsychotic drugs, like Reglan was once used, and they will get a restlessness, but there are people that get it in a much more severe presentation. And I do think it, and the literature says this, that it can be, a lot of the times physicians or providers will, it's hard to distinguish between what's the symptomology of their pre-existing condition, and a lot of people's condition might be schizophrenia if they're on antipsychotic, and what symptomology of the Reglan. So, and I to a degree, I really understand that. Because
you've been on the other side of it now.
Yeah, and it's very hard. But I feel like life is more precious to me because I've had this experience.
I know people go through depression and anxiety and various states of mental illness, but I really didn't understand the hard reality of how impactful, like how of the kind of place that your brain can put you in.
I didn't
I
think
didn't know it was possible to feel
that
the way. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was. So seeing it now, I think as a therapist that happens to work with people who are very acutely ill,
Mm-hmm.
I have a different compassion. I have I think a higher degree of empathy for those folks. I have a higher degree of empathy for my mom who struggles with mental illness. One of the bigger reasons why I went into this field. So, to be very honest, what's that?
What a gift in that sense.
It is, and this sounds really crazy given everything that I've shared during this conversation, but I'm not sure that I would go back in time and change it.
Yeah. Well, do you know who Phil Stutz is?
Yes, you've watched the Netflix documentary.
So he's actually a psychiatrist that practices as a counselor rather than drugs. And I could do an 8-hour podcast on Phil Stutz. I've read his books. I'm
No
in
way.
the cult.
Were you in the cult before the documentary? Probably not.
No.
Okay.
But, and I say that in jest. I don't think it's a cult. But anyway,
it's not.
He says, one of the things that he says, there's two things that he says that have been really valuable for me. The first is 3 aspects of reality are pain, uncertainty, and constant work. Those are constant aspects of reality that we don't escape. Everyone has this idea of their mind, this dream that they chase, whether it may be fleshed out or not. They think they're going to work themselves to a place where they're secure, there's no pain, and they don't have to work to be there anymore. And that doesn't exist. Everyone has uncertainty, everyone has pain, everyone has work, whether it's progressive work or work in terms of things that they have to deal with. The other thing he says, and I think this is true, I mean, you see this throughout mythology, and you see this in any sort of motivational speaker that you might be inspired by. And he says that all the progress and the value and the meaning that we look for in life is always on the other side of pain. So when he has patients come in with trauma or disease, he sees those things that someone might approach with empathy and validation. He sees those things always as opportunities to help that person grow. Those unique experiences provide the possibility for that person to be strengthened in a specific way that's unique to them. And so one of the things he talks about is the reversal of desire. So this concept of everything you want is on the other side of pain, like meaning like anything worth doing is like you have to work hard for it, otherwise everybody would do it, that kind of thing. That's not uncommon. But one thing he says is to sort of flip that on its head, learn to actually desire the pain. Because if you can do that, there's really no limit to the meaning that you'll find or the progress that you'll make.
Leaning into uncomfortability.
Leaning into a radical acceptance, another way to say it. But I'm actually with you. I still suffer in some ways from what the Reglan did to me. I think I would be cognitively a little sharper if I didn't have it. I still have these paresthesias, but they're not as disturbing as they used to be.
Do you get it in your head? I get the paresthesias in my head.
A lot of people do, like the brain zaps. I don't get that. It's all my extremities. And I still really have trouble sleeping.
Okay.
But I think I'm with you. I don't think I would trade it, because what I didn't get to is once I started the propranolol, I think I approached it almost like a 12-step program.
Of that.
Like I have this disease state that I'm in, so it's like I accept that. So, I don't know if I can ever make my brain normal again. Like I probably can't make my brain what it was before I had this, right?
Yeah.
Like once you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. Not that it's the same thing, but it's the same principle, right? I was never an addict, but once your brain has changed, it's changed. But brains are also incredibly plastic and adaptable, and they can always sort of shape and re-engineer themselves in response to the input that they receive.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thought was, if I just throw the absolute kitchen sink at this, stop doing anything that I think might even be a little bit bad for my brain, and do all kinds of good stuff I think is good for my brain, like really elementary school, like simple.
Yeah.
Like that.
Cut all the caffeine out.
Yeah, all the caffeine, anything bad. Like I started doing research, like I started a combination of glycine and N-acetylcysteine, and I do magnesium, vitamin D, and a combination with vitamin K2. And then I'll tell you, I got really strict about my diet, 0 caffeine, absolutely 0 alcohol. And then when I started to run, it was like, running's good for your brain. When I started to run, I would start to get this like runner's high. And I had that same feeling that you felt from the Ativan the first time where you took it, where you were like, wow, I'm me again. Like, hi, Lindsay.
Yeah.
And I had that experience of feeling like myself, and a sense of hopefulness, and it wasn't coming from a drug. So I continued to do a lot of running and a lot of cardio, but I also, for the first time in my life, started seeing a therapist, started really to think about my relationships and how I'm spending my time and what I'm getting for the time that I'm spending. I did reach out to a psychiatrist, and I do take some medication now, but it's not, I don't take any SSRIs. I don't take anything that I don't think is really impacts my cognition or makes me vulnerable in any way. I think I don't take benzodiazepines. I don't take narcotics. Like I take an anticonvulsant, which addresses that glutamate GABA balance. And that's the main thing. I've gone on and off Wellbutrin. I'm never sure how I feel about that. And then I take things to help me sleep. Sometimes I take Benadryl and melatonin. Sometimes I've tried the other sleep aids that they give. I tried trazodone or mirtazapine. Those things are horrible for me. Horrible for me.
Trazodone gives everyone nightmares, but it gave me horrific nightmares, and it didn't help me sleep at all. I never tried mirtazapine.
It didn't give me nightmares. It gave me headaches, and it made my whole body hurt.
Wow.
And it made it much harder to sleep.
Yeah.
Mirtazapine helped me sleep, but it actually brought back the akathisia that I hadn't had in 9 or 10 months.
Wow.
And it just wasn't worth the trade-off. I just tried mirtazapine for sleep in the last 10 days or so, and so I'm still actually ramping down from some of that akathisia that came back. But the point is, I think I probably, if I had something else going on, I wouldn't be willing to have this conversation publicly, especially not in my line of work. And just with the way, once you say something online, it's there forever.
It's
and it can and will be used against you,
as a
right?
therapist, it's actually, it's very, because I'm going to have my own business at some point in my career, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's very challenging to wrap my brain around.
But I think for you, it's a strength because people can hear this and say,
Yeah.
this is someone who's been through mental struggles, and they can actually hear you. It's like they staff rehab clinics with alcoholics, recovering alcoholics.
Yeah, that
So
is it.
this is what people can hear.
Right.
Right. So I think actually, yeah. So this experience for me has caused me to find discipline in so many other areas in my life as part of that healing process, that I think I'm in a better place in my life than I would have been if I hadn't taken the drug. That said, I have real scars from it.
Very deep scars. I think at some point we talked about how we have a lot of PTSD symptoms.
No question. No question. But I'm thankful to you for spending a couple hours with me and listening to me meander about this, and it's just good to have communion with someone who's had a similar experience. And my job, like, I'm busy and I have a fairly significant stress load, but I sort of appreciate people reaching out to me from the group and being someone who can say is like, I'm better and you will get better. And I'm saying that as a person who's been through it, and I'm sort of honored to be in that position. And it makes me feel like I'm doing something meaningful.
Yeah, I think I never thought I would be in a position to help others, and yet similarly, I'm able to be helpful to folks who are just joining, and it's almost like another cohort going through stuff. So it's cool to be in that cohort just above the new folks. To be helpful in the way.
It's a ministry in a way.
It's a ministry. Yes, I love that. And I think that, and I don't want to speak for you, but being a part of this, I think for me has been a part of my healing. To be able to tell my story, to be heard, right, by somebody who knows what I've been through, and to be a part of something that somebody out there might hear, and to do something different. Maybe if it just one nurse hears this, or one physician that takes some small amount of interest, like, I'm invested in that.
Me too. And I'm not pretending like I'm going to save the world, but
I want to when it comes to
I've been
Reglan.
through this, and you've been through this, and it's been horrible, and we'll tell everybody we can that it's horrible and not to do it.
Yeah.
And we'll tell the people that have done it that it gets better, right? So I think that's a good note to end on.
So too.
Good talking to you.
Nice talking to you, Thad.